Hey guys, this is NUSensei, and today I've got a rather unusual topic. Can arrows viably be used as melee weapons? This is kind of a hypothetical fantasy question, although I have come across a couple of zombie preppers who insist that arrows could be used as an improvised weapon. And I suppose if you are doing some serious consideration for archery as a prepper topic, then this may be something that comes across your mind. I want to preface this video by pointing out that I'm not an expert in this in any sense. I'm not a trained martial artist, and I don't have a setup which allows me to do accurate historical demonstrations. If you are interested in historical demonstrations, I recommend the channel ThegnThrand. He does a fantastic job of using historical weapons on historical armor, so do check his channel out. The premise I'm exploring today is the situation where someone is surprised in close quarters combat and they have to use an arrow as an improvised melee weapon. This is something which conceivably could happen in a lot of pop culture references, for example Green Arrow, and this is used by Legolas in the Lord of the Rings exactly once, in the Battle of Ammon Hen. Come to think of it, there aren't that many examples of arrows being used as melee weapons, and there might be a reason why. Before that, I want to make a serious point. There's a general misconception that archery is a dangerous sport and that people can get hurt. You might see photos occasionally on Google or Facebook, and I've been asked often, have you been shot at before? And this makes no sense, because you shoot at a target. Now, historically, archery was used as a weapon of war, so yes, you would shoot people, but you're not shooting people in modern archery, you shoot at targets. Archery is in fact one of the safest sports because there's no contact between people. I've also had to explain this to event organizers who say, oh, can you do a clinic for young kids? I said, of course we can. Oh, but can you use foam tipped arrows? Why? I mean, one, these things fly terribly. They're used for laugh, by the way, not target practice. And they fly terribly. But why would you need a foam-tipped arrow if you're not shooting at people? And this is something I have a really hard time explaining to organizers at some point or another. Even the regular arrows you use for target practice aren't dangerous. They're just carbon or aluminium sticks. The regular target points are actually blunt, so they can go into a target, but they won't do any damage to you because, well, they're blunt. Even the field points, which are very popular, they've got a pointy tip, but inherently there's nothing dangerous about the arrow itself. In fact, the most dangerous part of the arrow is not the tip, but this end, the nock. This is because when the arrow is embedded in the target, it becomes a hazard. Humans generally are very bad at keeping track of long pointy objects out of your field of vision, and more injuries have been caused by this end rather than the pointy end. This typically happens when you're at the target, you bend down, and then you come up, and then you jab yourself in the face with the point, and you can cause facial injuries and eye injuries by getting yourself hit by this end. This is why at the club we will yell at people who run towards the target or approach from the front. We tell them you have to go from the side and pull it out and make sure no one is behind you, because quite literally this thing is something that people don't pay attention to. So by pulling it out, you can in fact hurt someone more frequently with this end and not the pointy end. Speaking of pointy ends, even the pointy end isn't that dangerous. Now historically, archers would have used narrow armor-piercing tips, such as the bodkin point, and they were designed to punch through armor. The actual damage was quite minimal. You would likely die from infection, which would take days. A single hit with an arrow wouldn't exactly put you out of action. Hunters, on the other hand, would know that the tool of preference is the broadhead. Now, unlike a target point or bodkin point, the broadheads have a bladed edge, and these are designed to cut. When hitting a target, the blades would cut through flesh and arteries, causing the target to bleed out. And this would be accelerated if you hit a vital organ. Even so, broadheads are similar to knife wounds. A single wound probably won't kill you, but multiple wounds will be more likely to cause death due to loss of blood. That said, there has been at least one recorded instance of a man being killed by an arrow in Melbourne. The actual circumstance was a target compound shooter was testing a sight, had it set too low, and the arrow went over the backyard and killed the man. I would believe this was a target point. I don't know the exact circumstance of how he died, but an arrow can kill in certain circumstances. Okay, with all that said, let's do some testing. My setup is very basic. I'm using my foam target. This is not an analog for flesh. It doesn't need to be, so that's beside the point. I'll be using both the broadhead and the field point for comparison, and the scenario will be that I've been surprised when shooting, so I'm doing close quarters combat with my bow still in hand, and I'm using an arrow as an improvised weapon. First, we'll try the regular field point. So this is the last thrust. Again, the foam target isn't a very good target to experiment on. It is already soft from previous usage, so this isn't much of an indication. It has gone through not that much on a foam target, which is probably the same as if you shot it from a bow, actually. So a little surprised at how much force you can get from a thrust. But again, this isn't a very good material to experiment with. And now the broadhead. So last thrust, again, foam isn't a very good experimental material. It goes in this much, but which isn't saying that much, but it does penetrate. So not as clean as the target point, so it had more resistance going in, but it does cause a much more vicious wound. There's a horizontal slit. Also, the reason why broadheads destroy targets, they simply cut them up, whereas the field points will just go through and come straight out. Interesting. Probably had a harder time pushing the broadhead through, but it can have devastating results. I'm actually a little surprised. Initially, I thought that the arrow would be completely useless as a hand-to-hand weapon. It doesn't seem to be a solid weapon, and it's not that long. It's not a spear. I mean, you might kind of think you could use it like a spear, but it's not a spear, and it doesn't have the weight of a true melee weapon, so it's very hard to control sometimes. That said, at extreme close quarters combat, I could use the arrow to jab where I wanted to. It is very dependent on your direction, so if you don't quite get a clean hit, it'll simply nick the target and come off. But I found that if you've got a good thrust in, you could apply quite a bit of force behind the arrow to get some good penetration. So I'd imagine that if someone uses against you as a melee weapon, this could do some serious damage, especially from a broadhead. Not so much from a target point, but definitely a broadhead could be used as a sharp improvised weapon. There are some limitations to using the arrow as a weapon, and one of them is obviously length. It's not a spear. You can hold it like a spear if you want to, but there's not much distance you can get from using this as a long weapon. There's not much of a stand-on factor using an arrow, so I don't think someone will be afraid to come at you even though you're holding the arrow. You can get some good thrusting power behind it. The hardest thing in this test was actually holding my bow, because that was a scenario. You're shooting your arrows, you get surprised, you're holding the bow, and you have to defend yourself with your arrow. If I didn't have my bow, I could probably be more agile using this as a bladed pointed weapon, so I can get more thrust in, I can go for the face. So you can use this kind of effectively if you absolutely had to. I found that holding it close to the point, kind of about here, does make some difference in control. You can get it in the places you really want to, so neck, eye, lower chest. There is some control in it. If you hold it further back, you can get more thrust behind it. And bear in mind, this is just me using my upper torso. Again, assuming that I don't have the chance to actually fight it out in a real melee situation. If I could use a spear and step in, I probably could get more thrust behind it, but this seems to be pushing what the arrow is meant to be used for. So as an extreme close quarters weapon, it can hurt. By the way, can you slash with it with a broadhead? You probably could. Not very effective. Again, it only has a very small cutting edge. This is the only effective part of the weapon. You can't use it to swing really. You can, if you aim it correctly, slash at someone, but I don't think it's going to cause more than superficial wounds. So the arrow is primarily a thrusting weapon. Could it hurt someone at close range? Yes. I originally thought no, but you probably can do significant damage if you use this as a lunging, thrusting weapon. But it is very limited. One of the factors which count against it is its lightweight. There's just nothing behind it. Carbon shafts are very light, wood shafts are very light, the point itself is very light. It's not enough to give you confident balance, so you can't really control it as a proper melee weapon. Additionally, it does get knocked away really easily, so I don't think anyone's going to be intimidated by this in your face. I mean, yeah, it might be scary, but it's not going to really make a determined fighter flinch. I think that's the main surprise factor, is using an arrow can cause people to flinch, but it's not going to present a credible threat. They can easily brush it aside. They can even take a hit, by blocking with their forearms and get a superficial cut, but not something that will stop them from attacking you. So overall, as a weapon, the arrow can function in an emergency situation, but I wouldn't draw it as the first weapon I have as backup. The other problem is simply the lack of defense. As I said before, there's no weight behind the arrow, so you can't use it to deflect the parry blows. The effective point of the arrow is only this part of the tip, which means once you get past it, there's nothing you can do to stop someone from closing and grabbing you. This is the standard distance, basically my arm's reach plus a bit more, and really from here, would you be intimidated by someone holding an arrow like this? I mean, as long as you're a meter back, and you can close a meter with one step. Once you get past the arrow point, there's not much I can do to protect myself with the arrow itself. I mean, this is the best I can do. I mean, if you try to imagine someone using an arrow as a legitimate martial arts weapon, you have a stance, you can probably thrust towards you like that, around thrust, under thrust. This is probably the best I can do. I can't do anything else. I can't do any side movements, any round circular motions. It's like literally a one-shot weapon. This is the only thing I can do. Can it hurt if I hit you? Yes. If you get hit by it, it will hurt. But it's something which I imagine if someone is serious about fighting you, they can avoid you or dodge it or deflect it. So it is not a weapon that I would fall back on. If this was a hypothetical situation where I was jumped while holding a bow and arrow, I might use the arrow as a single thrust, discard it, and then pull out something else. Might be a short weapon like a machete or a long blade, or in this case, just a simple wood baton. This sort of thing is more versatile. There's more damage and more strikes you can use. You can thrust, you can strike. This is more versatile, and I would put more faith in a weapon like this as an improvised weapon rather than using an arrow. The arrow has no versatility. It's a one-strike weapon, and once you hit someone, you're probably not hitting them more than once, unless you really have the upper hand. I would probably have more faith using my bare hands. The distance isn't that much. With bare hands you can punch, you can hold, you can grapple, and that seems more useful in an emergency close combat situation rather than an arrow point. Do bear in mind that historically archers weren't helpless in melee. Archers did carry secondary weapons. Archers would carry spears, mauls, swords, daggers. So realistically, if someone was attacked in close quarters, rather than rely on speed shooting or using the arrow, the safe bet would have been to discard the bow and pull out their secondary weapon. That was actually a lot more fun than I thought. Like I said, my opinion coming into this was that the arrow was useless as a weapon. It's a very fantasy-like thing to use arrows as melee weapons. But after testing out for a bit, my verdict is that the arrow can be used as a weapon, but only in a very specific circumstance. It is, in my opinion, a one-shot thrusting weapon that you would use once and then fall back to a different option. I wouldn't pick the arrow as a go-to weapon. If I wasn't carrying anything at all, if I was attacked in a non-combat situation, then I would definitely prefer to use something else like a short weapon or my bare hands and grapple rather than trying to use the arrow. The arrow itself isn't reliable. It's very hard to use effectively in close quarters, and it lacks the versatility of a proper weapon. I would rank the arrow equal to a survival knife. If not worse. The survival knife not only has multiple functions, but it does, depending on what knife you have, you can have a decent, reasonable sized blade, which you can work through much better than an arrow. The arrow has an effective blade if you're using broadheads. If you're using target points or field points, don't even think about it. The field points do nothing that's lethal. The broadheads can inflict lethal damage. So if you have to inflict lethal damage and you have nothing else, a broadhead arrow can be an option. But I still have the opinion that you have far better options in your bare hands than you do with using an arrow. Anyway, hope you found this interesting. I sure did. This is NUSensei. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.